Welcome everybody to this very important masterclass. This is the first of many of what you need to know. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick. I'm Membership Education Director for the National Speakers Association New York City chapter. And each month we're going to be interviewing a number of top experts in the field of speaking. We're going to be looking at your speaking business, marketing yourself effectively. We're going to be looking at how you improve your speaking skills. We're going to be looking at how you're able to run your speaking business better. We're going to look at how you're successfully going to be able to navigate the world of being able to create other products, other courses, even delivering corporate trainings. Next month, we've got a great interview with Neil Gordon, who's the creator of the Silver Bullet Method, which is a wonderful way of explaining exactly what you do in a very short space of time. In November, we're going to be talking to Margaret Considine, a brilliant corporate trainer who's delivered excellent trainings on negotiation and influence and persuasion. She's a huge consultancy back home in Ireland, but she's worked in many different countries and is very sought after. She'll be explaining how to transform your keynote or ideas into a corporate training. And then in December, we've got JJ Peterson from StoryBrand, co-author of Marketing Made Simple, a wonderful expert in the area of marketing yourself, how to put together a great website that grabs people, as well as being able to put your message across to people in a way that gets them hooked. And again, as many of you probably have heard, the StoryBrand method is one of the most popular methods of marketing out here today. But today, I am beyond excited to introduce you all to a very dear friend of mine. Tom Ziglar is CEO of Ziglar Inc. He's known, and he calls himself the proud son of Zig Ziglar. Now, if you haven't heard of Zig Ziglar and you're in the speaking business, you need to, because Zig Ziglar is one of the best that's ever done it. Probably the GOAT, or the greatest of all time, one of the greatest for sure. And Zig has probably impacted the lives of hundreds of millions of people worldwide over his long career. Tom is someone I met about 10 years ago. I'll let Tom share this story in a moment, but Tom is one of the best people I know. Forget about speakers. I've seen him speak. He's a terrific speaker, phenomenal speaker. But what I love about Tom is his humanity, is the kind of person that he is. He very much lives by his values. And I've learned a massive amount from him over the years. And it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce the author of a number of books, including Choose to Win, which is a great book you'll see behind me. I'm kind of on purpose plugging your books, Tom, as best I can. And he's also the author of an upcoming book, The 10 Leadership Virtues for Disruptive Times, which will be out in the next few months, which is, again, from myself and Tom discussing it, it sounds to be an absolutely brilliant, unstoppable book. So beyond any shadow of a doubt, this is one of my most favorite people in the speaking world, and I'm delighted, in fact, in the world, and I'm delighted to introduce the wonderful Tom Ziglar. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with us.
All right, Owen, thank you, my brother. Like a little over 10 years ago, I guess I met you the first time over in Monaco, and you were helping to put on that event. And I remember right out of the gate, I'm kind of new to speaking at that point, and I've got this, when you're new, you always rely on the PowerPoint or some props. So I had this PowerPoint, and gosh, the encouragement, only surpassed by the sarcasm, was so heartfelt from Owen in my PowerPoint. And we just hit it off just from the very second. And we've stayed in touch regularly. And I was so excited when he moved to New York. In fact, probably, what was it, about 5 years ago when I went to your event over in Ireland. Dublin's one of my favorite places in the world. And he says, "Why are you coming?" I said, "Well, I invest in myself. I like to learn, and I want to learn from you." So just a two-way street of testimony going on. So what an encourager Owen is. I've watched him deal with people one-on-one at events, and nobody does it better. So I'm grateful to be here. Of course, the NSA, and that's in my blood. I think my father was one of the early founding members of it and watched it grow. There's a Cavett Robert Award in my office at the company. So always able and willing to support anybody building a speaking career. So thanks for having me.
Well, Tom, today we're going to be talking about the mindset of a world-class speaker. And this is something that a number of people that I talked to were really interested in. So again, like normal, what I'd love to do is deep dive, ask real specific questions, because I want everybody on the call today to walk away with specific things they can do, specific insights, understandings about how the speaking business works and how to remain at the top. You know, your dad obviously had, you know, see you at the top in terms of one of the things, and still at the top, and a whole series of that. But really, he personified it. And what I'd love to do, Tom, is just to start out with, what are the most important lessons that you would say you learned? Like Zig Ziglar was a phenomenon, right? He spoke to so many audiences. He was so well known. He was just everywhere. And what were the main lessons you learned? Because you started out working very early on in the warehouse, right, packing tapes, and you made your way up through the company, doing all different areas of the company. So it wasn't just like you immediately took over Ziglar Inc. You really worked through it, but also you got to see Zig more than anyone else. What are the most important lessons, learnings that you got from watching one of the world's greatest speakers in action?
Probably, you know, there's so many, it's hard to, you know, just to give them all. But when I was at the events, I remember many events, he would be the last speaker, and some of these would be kind of network marketing events. And so he would get done at 1 a.m. and he would autograph until 4 or 5 the next morning. And what does that mean? It means that he was not only on stage for the people who were there, but as long as the schedule allowed, he would talk to everybody. He never ran out. He never had this attitude that, hey, I've got other things to do. And when Dad passed away, which is 9 years ago now in November, we had over 10,000, actually 13,000 comments on our Facebook page. And these were they weren't just rest in peace comments. They were like paragraph after paragraph about how that person's life had been impacted by my father's message. And the common theme was this: I heard Zig speak. There were 10,000 people in the room. I was just one of many. I'd never met him before. I went and waited in line for 2 hours. And when I spent that 1 minute with him, it was like I was the only one in the room. And I heard that over and over again. And it just reminds me that none of us can be Zig Ziglar on stage, because everybody's unique. And Dad would tell you this if he were here: be yourself, take your gifts and talents and elevate them to the max, but be yourself. None of us can be Zig Ziglar on stage, but we can all be Zig Ziglar one-on-one. And I think that's like the difference between, golly, that's a great talk. I wonder if he really believes that. I wonder if he walks it out. And then seeing him in those one-on-ones, that was the validation in so many minds.
Love it. And I mean, look, by the way, the welcome to anyone who's just come in. And we're talking to Tom Ziglar, CEO of Ziglar Inc. And also at the end, we're going to get a chance. So I'm going to unmute. Anyone who wants to can unmute and ask Tom any question you like. So we're going to be going, I'll probably be talking to Tom for just over an hour or so. And then any questions after that anyone asks, would like to ask, please feel free. But just getting back to that, Tom. So with Zig, phenomenal ability to not just perform on stage, but off stage. Just in his performance, let's say on stage, what do you think made him stand out? What made him so effective? I mean, I remember his energy and his passion, right? And his storytelling, which was phenomenal. From your point of view, when you looked at your dad, because it's hard because you're biased, but what made him so good?
There were two things that really stand out, and I'll explain both of them back to back. The first one is I was trying to figure out, what did he do? What superpower did he have that would influence people? Because influence is when somebody hears what you say, and then they go and do it, and then they get a result, and then they come back and they tell you. And we still get letters every week with that sequence. I heard this, I applied it, my life changed. And then the second one is his character that allowed him to connect with people. So I'm kind of a nerd. I want to tell you, I like the nerdy stuff, the why behind the why. I like to know why it works. And I don't know about you guys, but I've heard so many speakers where I took lots of notes, and oh man, that was amazing. And I put that notepad in my car or in my briefcase, my backpack, and then 6 months later, those notes fall out, and I'm like, wow, that was really good. I should have done that. Anybody have that? So I said, well, why is Zig Ziglar different? And he had this formula, and the formula I don't think he knew he had it. It was hope, identity, will, skill, and refill. And so every talk that he gave that was over about 35 minutes, it had these 5 points in it. One is he would create hope in the audience. He would just come out there with his energy, his enthusiasm, his humor, his connection, and he'd create hope. People would, the reality is that if people don't have hope, they're not even going to try. Right. And so he would create hope. He'd let them know the possibilities. They were born to win, that it's a choice, what you can do in your life. And then the second one, and this was the mystery to me, is identity. And he would tell his story, and he would talk about, losing his dad when he was 5. His dad died. He went to work when he was 6. He grew up in the Great Depression in Yazoo City, Mississippi. He was the 10th of 12 kids. His mom had a 5th grade education. So he's raised by a single mom with a 5th grade education in the heart of the Great Depression. Started work full time when he was 6. Went into the Navy in high school, and right out of high school, never did well in school. Got out of the Navy, got married, got a little bit of college, didn't do well in college, got his first job and in sales. And for 2.5 years, he didn't sell anything. But he did. He sold his furniture, he sold his car. And then a mentor who he admired in the business poured into him and put their hands on his shoulders and looked at him and said, Zig, in all my life, I've never seen such a waste. But you could be a champion if you believed in yourself. And he would tell that story. And then he would talk about how he went on this mission to figure out, what does it mean to believe in yourself? And the other part was, you got to go to work on a regular schedule. So this belief in self and work hard, right? That was the message. And so what would happen in the room is people would walk in and they would be like, gosh, I heard about Zig Ziglar. I could never be Zig Ziglar. I mean, look at him. He's wealthy. He probably flies private to these big events. He's in the green room. He's hanging out with the celebrities. I could never be Zig Ziglar. And then he tells that story, and wait a second. If that was his background, if he can, maybe I can. And so this identity thing would connect. And then years later, I read a book by Daniel Coyle called The Talent Code. And it really goes into neuroscience. So this is another nerd thing. And so I like to know what makes the brain work. Well, if somebody identifies with you, they are 30% more likely to follow through on whatever advice you give them. And it's a powerful, powerful concept. And a lot of times, we get trapped. We've got a 15-minute presentation or 20, and we leave out the story about ourselves, or we just condense it down to what the group wants. Well, you know what we want? We want the group to take action on whatever content we're bringing that can improve their life. That's what we want. And that was Dad's goal. So every presentation was centered around, what can I share that when they apply, it will change their life? And that's why his story was in there, because he knew that it worked. And so the hope, identity, and then will, skill, and refill. And what he said in every message is, you got to take care of your will, which is your heart, your attitude, your desire, your want to. This stuff, motivation. Some people say motivation doesn't last. It's temporary. Yeah, it's just like bathing. It doesn't last either. But if you do it every day, you smell good. So you got to have that constant build-in of what motivates you. And then the skill is our professional skills. We got a Dad was, all those quotes that he's known for, people think it just happened. He was a wordsmith. He worked on every phrase over and over again. And so when he got his talk that he'd given thousands of times, he would input and upgrade and change about 3 to 5% of it every time he went out. He was trying to take the least effective thing out of that talk and add something else into it. And by the way, he had tons of talks. He had gosh, I think at one point I measured he could go 30 hours speaking without notes and not repeating himself. That's how much content that he had, but every bit of that content was, was worked over and massaged, and it was done for the ultimate goal of helping the people in the room. The second thing is, years ago, probably like 10 years ago, I did this little study from a spiritual perspective, and here was the study. If if uh, if there was a spiritual quality that we could develop in ourselves from God's perspective, what would be the most important one? And so I looked at scripture, I looked at different places, and I came up with words like love and humility and obedience. I mean, these are all great things. And then I found this word called brokenness. And I said, that's Dad. And so what does broken mean? Brokenness means not that you're broken and you can't be used, but it means that you understand that there's nothing of any eternal significance that you can accomplish without God's help. And so when Dad would walk on stage, he came out with not just humility and love, but this deeper understanding that he was just there for the people in the room. He was there to serve the people in the room. There's a term that we call at our headquarters, we call it speakeritis. And speakeritis is when speakers start believing the applause, they get the big head, and the publicity is fantastic and the book is selling great, and their ego gets so big that as long as they can stay 50 feet away from people, it's okay. But as soon as you get in the back room with them, you realize they got a problem. So what did that lead to? When I would ask Dad, how did you do? And I watched the talk. He got 5 standing ovations, a 45-minute talk, and 5 of it, people were on their hands applauding throughout. He never judged a presentation by the applause. He never even judged the presentation by if the host was happy with it. He judged it by 2 things. Number one, did I prepare all that I could? In other words, as a speaker, maybe not in the last 18 months, but if you're speaking a lot, you're going to get plane delays. You're going to get canceled flights. You're going to have 3 engagements in 2 days, and your prep time might be interrupted. That's not the challenge. The challenge is did you prepare with every second that you had for that event? So he always judged first, did he prepare what he could with the time he was given? And then the second one was so simple, and that is, did he speak God's truth in love? Did he speak the truth in love? In other words, too many speakers today come out with the truth and they use it as a hammer. And if you look at the political spectrum, we see this all the time. He never used the truth as a hammer. He spoke it in love. He spoke it in the idea that this is how I live, and this is the benefit. Maybe you might want to know more about it. Not you're doing it wrong, and if anybody who believes that's an idiot. He never did that. So that truth and love. And then when you add brokenness to that, one of the attributes of a broken and brokenness is they never worry. Dad never worried. And so for years, he would say that. And I couldn't figure out what he meant. And this is what I figured out. When you speak the truth in love, that nugget you've given, that truth and love that you've given, it's irrelevant whether people like you for it or dislike you for it. That's between them and the Creator. And so Dad was literally able to go on stage, just pour out the love, not judge the event by the reaction to the audience, but did he speak the truth in love, and did he prepare? And that's why people loved him, because the humility, that whole aspect of it, that's what people bought into.
Love it. And Tom, just one other thing with regards to Zig. One last thing on that, because I find this not only fascinating but really useful just from a mindset point of view in terms of how we as speakers need to be thinking about ourselves, about the audience. I mean, there's so much packed in there, what you just said. With regards to something me and you talked about recently, which was the difference between speaking, looking to speak like Zig versus looking to see like Zig, right? As in, because I remember you learned a lot from watching the audience, and that's, I'm watching what your dad saw in the audience. So what is it that Zig, or what is it that you look for when you're speaking to an audience?
Yeah, so I'll give kind of some background on Dad. He was in direct sales selling stainless steel waterless cookware, and he gave probably 2 to 3 thousand presentations selling that cookware over many years. And it was a memorized, scripted sales presentation. And he was actually doing cooking for usually 4 to 5 couples sitting around a table. But when you give about 500 of that, you know the words, right? It's like, you know what's next. You don't even have to look in the pan to know what's cooking and everything. And so that's where everything he did was watching the audience. It was, body language. It was, how did they receive that? And so he started weaving humor in, his own stories in, and everything was feedback from how is the audience receiving this? And that, I believe, is what allowed Dad in any circumstance, regardless of what, if the power failed, the air conditioner went down, whatever happened, he could read the audience and he would know, right? And so he never, as an example, he never planned his jokes and his talks. He always had his presentation and then he had the jokes on the side. And one day there was a psychologist in the room and they were timing him. And at the end they came up and they said, "Mr. Ziglar, you tell a lot of jokes." And he said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Why do you do it?" And he said, "Well, whenever I see the body language going down, I tell a joke, because if I can get people laughing, everybody's attention will come back in. And then I can weave in a point that I want to make. And when I have their attention at the highest level, then that point sinks in a little bit better. We get better results." And the psychologist was, "Wow, that's perfect. That's exactly right. Do you know how often you tell a joke?" And Dad said, "No, I have no idea." And the psychologist said, "I timed it. You tell a joke almost every 7 minutes." And he said, "Do you know why every 7 minutes?" And of course, Dad said, "No, I have no idea." And he said, "Well," and this was 30 years ago. He said, "Well, that's how much time there is between commercials on TV." And so our brains were conditioned to that 7 minute attention span. Well, I'm here to tell you, speaking today, attention spans are like a goldfish, right? I mean, they are not 7 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes if you're lucky. And so, from a speaking skill, what does that really mean? It means that whether we use voice inflection or tone, or we ask a question to the audience, or we show some media, or whatever it is, we need to be cognizant that we need to intentionally bring people's attention back in, because people will drift. They will wander into it. And so that was when he saw the audience. So a couple of weeks ago, I spoke out in San Jose to a business, and when Owen said you got to see the audience, I'd had a conversation with Dennis Waitley. Prior to that, he's got a new book that's out that's fantastic, and I read the book. And in the book, he made a comment. He said, "We've got to turn our affirmations into confirmations." And it like clicked a light bulb in me, because I'm a huge believer in positive self-talk, and really, the most powerful story in the world is the story we tell ourselves. And so we need that self-talk. But what Dennis was saying was, no, we need to move it from that's something I want to become to I already am, right? And I just got to elevate it. And so as I was preparing for that talk, 3 days before, I'm like, gosh, this is like an audition talk, right? If I do good on this one, I get 4 more engagements. And I said to myself, I've got to give a really good talk. And then my self-talk came back and said, no, you have to be a really good talk. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but what that means is you've got to know what you're going to talk about so well that the only thing that matters is you being able to see the room. And so I had a 2-hour presentation, and 20 minutes into it, I got a question from one of the employees, 20 years old. And that employee said, that's all well and good where we can have dreams and goals, but I dropped out of high school. I can work here my whole life. I can probably never afford a house in California. How does that apply to me? So don't we all like that question right in the middle of our presentation? So I had two choices. I could just say, yeah, we'll get to that and never get to it. Or everybody in the room wants to know the answer. And so now over the next hour and a half, the whole presentation revolved around the people in the room. That question was it. And so when Dad would see the audience, that's what I meant by it, is he could see where they were coming from. Now, when you're in a big auditorium and you got 10,000 people, it's a little bit different than if you've got, I think I had 45 in the room that I was in, right? Two different scenarios. So it's not apples to apples on the crowd size, but that's what it was about. It was being there for the people in the room, and that's it. That's why you're there.
Love it, Tom. This is really, really great stuff. Just wanted to mention a comment from Marcella. Hi, Marcella. Marcella worked for the publishing house that published Zig's books in Spanish. She was in contact with the authors, and he was the kindest and nicest author she ever worked with. So doesn't surprise me at all, but that is very, very cool. Thanks so much for sharing, Marcella. Some great comments coming in. I do want to ask you, Tom. So we've talked, pretty much about the great Zig Ziglar. One of the things that struck me most when I met you the first time, whatever it was, 10 years ago now, was so often when I meet, let's say, a son of a famous speaker or famous author, I expect them to sort of be trying to prove themselves. So I expect them to sort of want to come out of their, father or mother's shadow. And with you were the opposite. You were pretty much, yeah, I'm the proud son of Zig Ziglar. Let's talk about Zig. And you're the most egoless, even though that's not a word, but we make up words all the time. Most egoless speaker I've ever been in contact with. And it really falls very much in alignment with how humble your father was. But I want to ask you about your own experience, because obviously you learned a massive amount, and people always want to know about your dad because he's, a legend and a genius. But from your own experience, what are some of the lessons that you learned yourself, having spoken and making this sort of your main thing over the last few years? What are the lessons, especially since things have changed since your father's time? What are the most important lessons that Tom Ziglar has learned as you've become a terrific speaker yourself?
Yeah. So the first couple of years, gosh, it was terrible. I'd go and speak and the feedback would be really good, and all that stuff. But man, my stomach would be in knots. And I would, be anxious and concerned about the presentation. And then I had to have one of those sit down talks. I put myself in the corner and I said, Tom, what's going on? Why is this so hard for you? Because I was in the background. I was the operations. I was the president, but mainly operations and support, creating the platform for Dad and our other speakers to go out on. I never wanted to be a speaker, although people would ask me, and I'm like, no, we've got the best in the world. Let's hear them. And after dealing with that, I realized that I told myself a lie. And the lie I told myself was that people wanted me to speak like Zig Ziglar. And that's not true. They don't. In fact, it's an old phrase and we use it a lot, but what they wanted was the best version of myself. And what that meant to me is they wanted me to line up with Dad's principles and values, which is completely different than his style and his charisma and his personality, right? Because we're born with that, and then we develop it up, and it's a gift, and we can't, if we try to copy it or we try to fake it, everybody will know we're faking it. And if we're not really good at it, they'll say, golly, I don't know what it is, but there's just something not authentic there. And so I flipped the script in my head. This is kind of the mindset approach of, okay, well, what do I want to do? Oh, you know what? I'm a nerd. I've got really bad jokes and I'm proud of them. And I use a lot of examples. The new book that's coming out, over a year of research on everything that's changed in business since the pandemic and how that is changing the way we develop top performers, and what that means as an industry, as speakers, and what that means as business owners and key executives. What does that mean? See, I get into that, and so now I get to go build everything around my strengths and just go and be myself. And when I'm working with a prospect and they're like, hey, can you come do this and this? I'll ask a ton of questions because they might not be looking for me. And the last thing I want to do is go in and try to be what they want. That's not me, right? Because that doesn't do them any good. It doesn't do me any good. We don't get invited back if that's the case. And so I got really, really comfortable and confident around who I am and what my skills are. So that was a big learning curve. I'm also in the personality. We teach DISC as a company, and I'm an S. And so S's are very relational. The last thing I want to do is disappoint people. And so whenever I book myself for an engagement, I make friends before I go. So I'm always trying to meet other key leaders at that organization and people who are going to be in the room, just to find out what's keeping you up at night. What are the things that are a challenge for you? If there's any message that would make a difference in your life, what would it be? And now when I walk in, I've got a bunch of friends already there. And that's a lot better for me, my personality. That's a lot better position to be in. And, we always say under promise and over deliver. And so I'm always trying to think of extra things that we can put into it that would make that experience.
Love it. And I want to talk a little bit about, especially given the topic of your book, but specifically for speakers. Obviously, the world has changed massively in the last 18 months or so, or well, now at this stage, 19, 20 months. With COVID-19, that's affected a lot of speakers' businesses. Obviously, when you're hired to travel around the world and to deliver keynotes and deliver sessions and trainings, and all of a sudden that's not possible, you need to pivot to virtual. But a lot of people have lost a lot of business over the last 20 months or so. What do you think the most important mindset shifts or most important things that people need to be thinking about that are struggling with, becoming more resilient, or struggling with dealing with that kind of adversity, struggling with the anxiety or the uncertainty that has hit the speaking industry hard? What are the most important things to keep in mind, to remember, to learn?
Actually, one of the takeaways I got was from an author you recommended, Owen, which is Nassim Taleb, and he wrote the book The Black Swan. And in that book, he talked about black swan events and studied what happens in a society when something unforeseen happens, like a war, like a pandemic, like a financial meltdown, like a tsunami. And one of the things that is a huge indicator of success is that people who let go of the way it was the fastest and then embrace how it is now are the ones who do the best. And the example that he gave was in Cuba, when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and all of a sudden, and everybody fled Cuba who could when Castro. So this is before that, when Castro took over Cuba, and the Cubans who could, they fled to Florida and Miami. And many of them, when they landed, they didn't unpack their suitcases for 10 years. And the reason is they knew the phone call was going to come. Hey, we're going to have you back. We're going to have you, their families who was left behind were going to say, you can come home now. And so I'm telling this story to an executive leadership coach. And she goes, wow, did you know I'm from Cuba? I was a little girl when my parents fled Cuba. And I go, really? And she goes, yeah, when we moved into our house, my mom, she put a Cuba closet in the house. And she went out and bought fine china and she put it in the closet right after we got settled. And she said, we're going to take this fine china back to Cuba with us when we go. Nobody touch it. And then every month she would add to this closet. And then she said, we buried my mom a few years ago and we unpacked the closet for the first time and we all decided to use it. And it was just such a powerful illustration that whenever there's something like COVID, or a black swan, there's more problems than there's ever been. And I flip the problem into opportunity. That means problems equal opportunity. That means there's more opportunities. So I don't know if anybody here had this, but the shutdown happened. And literally the next day, I had 5 phone calls and emails back to back to back to back to back, canceling my engagements. And I felt like I was the worst speaker in the world. Anybody have that?
Every day, Tom, every day.
It's like, oh my gosh. And so what do? We throw a pity party. So I went and threw a pity party for myself. And the problem with pity parties is nobody likes to come. So it was just me. And then I realized, I said, wait a second. I'm not in the speaking business. I'm in the life-changing business. I mean, speaking is just one of the mediums to change lives. And so we immediately retooled everything we did to upgrade and online and do all these things. And so, yeah, the ability to go out and earn an income on a platform, speaking into a company, that really changed. But on the other side of it, guess what else has changed? There's more problems than there's ever been. Right now, there is a sea change in the business world because the core values of people have changed. And I call it the certainty of uncertainty, right? The reality of uncertainty and the certainty of mortality. So as a world, I mean, we can talk about US or Europe, but as a world, the reality of uncertainty hit us all collectively at the same time. Everything's uncertain. Well, guess what? On an individual basis, it's always been uncertain. We never know when we're going to have an accident or have something happen. And then the certainty of mortality, golly, so many people dealing with loss of and death of friends and family, huge. And then we all went home and everybody got depressed. And what are we going to do now? And so this is the sea change. If this is core values, this used to be work, right? And then everything revolved around work in the Western world, especially Europe's a little bit better, a little bit more advanced than this, but here everything's work, right? My personal life, my family, my physical health, work comes first and everything revolves around it. Now what's happened is people have gone home and they're like, you know what? Relationships are important. My physical health is important. Golly, I like living out here in this cool place rather than next to the office. That's important. And so now work is revolving around here. I think this is as big a reason as any that we've got 10.5 million jobs available and less than 9 million people looking. It's because people are trying to identify where it is they want to work so that their core priorities can stay intact. And so what does that mean for our clients? Here's the big issue today. This is my opinion on all the research. The number one challenge that businesses face is attracting, growing, and keeping top performers. There was a Grow Motely survey that I read and Grow Motely's a relatively new business. and they came into being to help remote workers, people who want to work remote, find companies who want to hire remote workers, right? They're kind of the matchmaker. And so they surveyed all of their clients, people who were wanting to work remotely, and they said, what do you value in an employer? And here were the top three things. Number one was they wanted healthcare benefits. Well, that's obvious. Number two is they wanted a personal and professional development plan. And number three is they wanted a coach. And so if I'm a leader in a business, what does that mean? It means that my people want to work for somewhere that has a vision of how they can grow, of how they can be a part of the future, of how they can buy into the mission and vision of the organization and how the organization is going to help them grow. And when they said a coach, they really broke it down into three areas. They wanted a career coach, yes, but mainly they wanted a mental coach and a lifestyle coach. So what does that mean? It means that people are struggling getting their brain around all this change and having kids working, schooling from home, and a partner or spouse, no longer employed, and all these different things. So as a speaker, what do? We've got to get back to who's in the room and what do they need. And so when we start to understand what they need, then we can go back in. And whether that is in a live presentation in front of live people, or it's on a Zoom call, or it's in a small group coaching session, these are all things that we are perfectly positioned to deliver.
This is really, really valuable, Tom. And again, all very much in alignment with building the kind of mindset that works. I want to get a little bit nuance with you from a business point of view, and that's specifically, what are the most important decisions as a business in terms of the business of speaking? And I know that you don't just do speaking. I know you deliver workshops, you do certification programs, you have books, you've got audio programs, video programs, online, digital. So you've got a whole gambit of different types of areas of the business. But on the business itself, and specifically, let's say on the speaking business, what are some of the most important decisions, the key pivotal decisions that you've made over the last few years, both before COVID that really helped you grow the business, that would be generally good ideas, and then since COVID began, any decisions you made around then as well? Would love you to share them.
Yeah, so there's different ways to generate income or revenue from being a speaker. Honorariums. I mean, most people, when they just get into speaking, that's what they think. My whole life is going to be honorariums. And then COVID happens. Whoa. So what do you do? And so everything that we've done, really in my own speaking career, like when I came out with the book, Choose to Win, the book in and of itself, it was not the goal. I didn't want to be a published author to say I was a published author. That book was written so that it could be a coaching program. That book was written and I made keynote speeches that I could certify other people to go out and give. We have an online, I teach an online webinar every single week with members in the Choose to Win community who come in, and I teach every week a new lesson, and I repeat about every 8 weeks. We start over. And so now I've got revenue coming in from an online webinar series that I'm doing. I've got keynotes that we're doing. We are licensing others to coach the material in that book. And I'm going in and doing corporate training, not just as a keynote, but as a follow-on to the material that we developed out of that book. So that book is, and that idea, that concept is productized and used about 5 or 6 different ways. And so it's all about leverage. It's all about how many different things can we put out there. And so the question you've got to ask is am I only going to do honorariums, or am I going to do other things as well? Because coaching isn't for everyone. Not everybody wants to be a coach, and that's fine. Maybe you want to be a consultant. Maybe you're going for larger corporate in-house contracts where you can take it out. But if you don't strategize on the front what it is you want to happen when you're done, then you're going to be always hunting the new deal. And that is a tough position to be in. So what is it that you want to do? And then from a branding perspective, what do you want to be known for? What is it that, when people talk about who you are and what you've done, what are they telling each other about you? And I think the way to win, the low hanging fruit, the way to win is to create an implementation strategy to where when you go in and deliver something and they get the big wow out of it, then that wow doesn't do this, it doesn't fall off, right? There's ways for them to keep implementing it that require some of your energy and effort going on, but to make sure that they're getting the benefit of it long after you're gone. We have really, since the pandemic, we took every workbook that we had that was like a physical workbook that we do in a live classroom that people would get pen and ink and write it in. We digitized every one of them, and we made it to where you could actually write into the note fields the notes so that we could email it out. People would pull their workbook up, they could type into it and hit save, and they've got a copy of their workbook right there. It wasn't a big deal, and I'm wondering, gosh, how come we didn't think of that before? But it's allowed us to keep going. Ken Blanchard, we're good friends with Dr. Blanchard, and he was telling me, this is before the pandemic, but he said, when 9/11 happened, our business really got, the whole speaking world got shut down. Anybody out there doing this when 9/11 happened? Anybody on here? So we were working with some big oil companies, and they called us up and they said, yeah, we're probably going to have you come, but it's not going to be this year. We're diverting all of our extra revenue into security and preparation, because everybody was worried about the next terrorist attack. They were worried, is my infrastructure safe? What are we gonna do? Well, at Blanchard's company, they had actually, I don't know if it was a year or two before, but they had put in 2 presidents in their company, the president of now and the president of the future. And so I want to challenge you as a speaker to, have 2, write down the president of now, because you're the president of now and you're the president of the future. And so the president of the future at Blanchard, I believe it was his wife who was doing it. They said, what's going to change in our industry? And that was right when online learning was coming on. That was right at the early stages. And so they had done a lot of research and figured out how they could deliver some of their training online. And so all the travel budgets got hit right after 9/11, and there was no more traveling for training. And so they were getting the calls like everybody else, except for one difference. They said, you know what? No problem. We'll just deliver it online. And it was such a new concept that these companies are like, really? How does that work? Oh, we'll show you. And they did a demo, and they kept a lot of their training. And so from a mindset perspective, always be thinking just that president of the future, what's it going to look like? Well, let me tell you what it's going to look like in the business world today. Top performers today own the leverage. Apple just about 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago, they told all of their executives and top people who had moved away from headquarters, they sent the message out, okay, guys, time to come back. And they got a letter back from, I think, 80 of them signed. And they said, we're not coming back. So when the number one brand in the world doesn't have the clout to pull their top people back into the way it was, that is a sea change. So what do we do now? Well, we've got to help businesses attract, grow, and keep top performers wherever they live in the world. right? And even bigger than that is, what about the businesses that are hybrid or a blend, where they have people at headquarters and people who come in 1 or 2 days a week and people who never come in? How do you build a culture in that type of a business? And so what's the challenge? We've got old leadership bias against that because they grew up in a certain way. So how can we be a solution? What can we do to bring in content and information that's going to change that? That's what we do. And then if we're going to teach that, is it going to all be face to face, or is some of it going to be face to face and some of it's going to be online? Because guess what? That's where the remote workers are.
So this is really useful, Tom. From your point of view then, and I just have a few more questions. So anybody out there listening, please, if you have any questions, you can stick them in the chat, but more than likely I'll ask you, if you're comfortable with it, to unmute when the time comes. But if you have any questions, please stick them in the chat, as you know, this is a great opportunity to learn from Tom. Just on what you were talking about there, Tom, just a few more. One is yourself, in terms of what is your plan? What is your vision in terms of moving into the future? Is there anything in particular you're working on? You've obviously just finished the book. What's next for Ziglar Inc.? What's next for Tom Ziglar?
Okay. Well, the book comes out. The book comes out December 7th, and kind of the program I'm launching is the back end to that book is coach leadership. It's a completely different style of leadership. And it might be considered close to servant leadership, except for it has very specific processes around goals coaching. And so it's not only coming from the heart of a servant leader or a coach leader, but it's working with people and helping them to improve their performance through a coaching process. And so I think there's a huge gap right now in the world for coaches who coach leaders how to coach their people. So let's just say I'm a leader. I've been doing traditional leadership. I've got positional authority. People do it because I said so. And now I've got this remote team and we're understaffed and it's very competitive. And we need collaboration, creativity, co-creation. That's our only way to exist. And I know that artificial intelligence and quantum computing and all this technological innovations coming, convergence is going to really change the landscape. And so how do I win? It's by attracting, growing, and developing people who've got it up here. And guess what? People talk about millennials or Gen Z being hard to lead because they've got problems. No, they don't have problems. Leadership, they're just tough on leaders. They want the right kind of leader. And so where Ziglar's going is we're talking about how to bring those top performers in, grow them and keep them, and get them aligned so that their goals are being met while the vision and virtues of the company are being lived out. So that's what our focus is. It's always changing, and if it changes again, Owen, we've talked about this. Everything we do is around a growth mindset. Companies who were very systematic and had 5 and 10-year business plans, they're the ones who struggled the most. Mm-hmm. Right? Because the game changed. And so how do we, as speakers, how do we build our career not only knowing it's going to change, getting excited when it does, because we now have an advantage.
Great. In terms of then by the way, it was asked, is this being recorded? It is indeed, Beth. Beth asked, is this being recorded? It is, and it'll be available in the platform in your members area in the next few days, as soon as possible. And also we'll put together a little sort of a summary guide for you in terms of some of the things we covered as well. So that's to look forward to. It'll also, I think, be available in the Facebook group as well. Tom, average day in the life of Tom Ziglar. And I'm going to ask you for 2 types, right? Because I don't know about everybody else. I'm fascinated as one speaker to another, what your average day looks like. So I'm going to ask you for a average speaking day and an average non-speaking day. And get some, I'm not going to get nuanced about or detailed into, whether or not you eat cornflakes with the left hand or the right hand, right? And some of the morning routine stuff, right? Because I think sometimes people get too nerdy about that. But what does an average day look like for Tom, speaking and not speaking?
Okay. Um, so I'll just, a pretty average day for me speaking. I had an event here locally on Friday with a leadership group of about 150. And my time to speak was from 9:10 until 11:30. Okay. So I'm just drawing the framework. I get up early. So most days I'm up at 5:30, but on this day, because I knew I wanted to get to the venue before 8 because I had a drive and I didn't want any stress. So it just doesn't matter where I am. If I'm staying in the same hotel as the event, I don't have to worry about the drive. If I'm staying where I've got to travel some distance to get there, and this was about a 35-minute ride with no traffic, I'm going to not put any stress into my morning, right? Just because that's not good prep. That's not the way you want it. So when I travel out of town to speak, I'm flying in the day before and never on the last flight.
Okay.
Right. That's just the way I do it. And I don't check anything that I'm going to wear on stage unless I'm going overseas and I don't have a choice. And by the way, has anybody here ever had your luggage lost and you didn't have your speaking gear when you went on stage?
Oh, yeah.
I have a tip. In the United States, find out what the local sports team is, and then go to Walmart and buy their jersey, and that's what you wear on stage. And you just tell everybody, my luggage was lost, and I tried to find the coolest thing that I love about this place, and I'm wearing it right now. So you will get a round of applause before you start. Okay. So I got there at 8, which meant I left at 7:20, which meant I like at least 2.5 hours of awake, think, quiet time. And I'm going over my talk. Like it'll take me like 10 minutes to go over a 2-hour presentation because I've already done the prep, but I'm just sinking it in my mind a couple of more times. So I got up at 4:30 on the day of the presentation so that I would be ready. And that starts the night before. So I'm in bed early the night before. The number one thing I could do to prepare is to get a good night's sleep. That's just it. Sometimes you have to draw the line with clients on the evening before activities, but also I'm a morning person, and I don't get energy from people. I get it from my quiet time. If you get energy from people, then staying in the venue and talking to other participants might be wound up, and the sleep's not that important, but that's up to you. So that's pretty typical on the day of an event. On a regular day, probably my regular day is 3 webinar. Now it's 3 Zooms or webinars a day. So this is my second webinar today, and I've got another one in a little bit. These I don't have to prepare for as much. If I'm preparing for a speech, I used to feel bad because I know some people practice in the mirror. I know some people write their speech out and get ready. All of mine happens in my thinking. So I'm an introvert, kind of a thinker. And so the earlier I can get the date and the topic that they want and do the outline for that topic, the more that speech comes together in my head as I think about it every single day. And then about 10 days to 2 weeks out, I put together every PowerPoint I could ever think of that would go in there. And then I start whittling. And for me, most PowerPoint slides I'm not reading the slide. They just represent stories I'm going to tell. So for me, a speech is a sequence of stories, and each story has a point. I don't like, I think I read a whole book on this. 7 words is the most, is really like the maximum amount of words that you want to have on a slide. When you have more than 7 words, you're asking the participant to pick between you and the slide. Right. And so I try to do that. I don't succeed every time because, some things have more. And when it has more, I'm usually reciting that slide by memory. So it could be a quote slide that I'm doing. So a typical day is up at 5, doing 3 hours of quiet time, just prepping all the stuff that I do. I'm not going to go into the detail. And then I don't have anything scheduled before 10 in the morning, regular. And then 10 is when I start getting into webinars, Zoom calls, things like that. So all my creative, all my writing, everything's done by 10.
When do you do the business end of things, like the financials or the human resource, all the stuff that we have to do as business owners? When do you do all that stuff?
I have some help on that. I look at QuickBooks from a financial perspective 2 or 3 times a week. Gosh, that used to be the majority of my time, but not anymore. Mm-hmm. But we've really simplified, really, really simplified. So we used to do a lot of things in a lot of different areas. And now we are certifying speakers, trainers, and coaches to carry on the Ziglar message. And then I write and I speak, and that's pretty much what we do. Now we do a lot of webinars and things like that. I do a webinar on our coaching program almost every week. And that's kind of a lead generator, a ClickFunnels approach to where we market, and the people who want to be a coach, they come to that and see if they like it. If they do like it, then all they do is set an appointment with us and we meet with them one-on-one.
Right. And so, and to everybody, we're going to open up for questions. So please do stick in if you've got a question, put it into the chat. And again, we'll probably ask you to ask it face to face if you're comfortable with that, but please do put the questions in there. I just want to ask from your own point of view, Tom, you've got a team with Ziglar and you've built that team. Obviously, there's an awful lot to learn from being able to run a business with a team like you have. But let's say Tom Ziglar was starting from scratch. Let's say you were as good a speaker as you are. So you're an excellent speaker. You've got topics to talk about. You've got a message to give. What are the most important things you would do from the get-go, from the beginning, with no team behind you? So you have to do it yourself. What would you go about focusing on? What would you do to get Tom Ziglar to reach the point where you can impact a lot more people?
Yeah, so 2 things. Number one is I would build a list immediately. Every day would be list building activities. Because when you start building a list of people who join the list because they like your message, then that over time, when you send them value, that gives you lots of options. You can hold an event where people pay to come hear you. You can do a webinar series where people will pay to go and do that. But it all starts with the list. And so what are you an expert in? What problem do you solve? And how often can you send that messaging out? And then you've got to convert people off of any type of social media onto your list, right? You've got to have very, very specific value proposition, value things that you offer that people would want to be on your list. Then the second is, okay, so now I've got a message that people like, and I've got a problem that I solve. Then I get very targeted on who in those areas hire what I bring and provide. And I like the Chick-fil-A when they first opened up in the United States, they gave away free samples in the mall. There are very few people who don't make it because they do thousands of free events and never charge. There are more people who in the beginning who don't make it because they never get the opportunity because they're not willing to go out and prove themselves. So, Dad did it 3,000 times. So I go out and speak as much as I can, as much as I can.
And what do you do after you've spoken, Tom? So, what's your because I think a lot of speakers, as speakers, what we do is we spend a lot of time focusing on the before. But are there certain things afterwards that you do as a sort of a self debrief or looking for or whatever it is that helps you become a better speaker? Because I know consciously I've seen you over the last 10 years really hone the craft, really continuously improve and get better. And it's something that I try to aspire to as well. But I'd love to know from your point of view, what do you do after the speech?
Yeah, well, follow up is everything. And and it's kind of like asking for a referral. Um, you can get contracted, you can go and speak, and then when you're done, you can ask for a referral. And that can be really awkward, right? That can be because it's coming out of the blue. However, if in your very first conversation, you say, Owen, how did you hear about me? Oh, well, I heard you in an event and I asked the host and they said you were great to work with. Ah, okay. So you talked to Melissa. She's fantastic. And so you're kind of here because Melissa said good things. And they say, yeah, well, that's what I want to earn from you. I want to exceed your expectations while we work together on creating the best presentation possible for your group, that I deliver beyond your expectations while we're there. And then when we're done, I've got some things that I'm going to follow up with you on to make sure that everything rolled out smoothly. And so that at the end, when I come to you and say, did I earn a referral? You're going to give me a high five and a big smile. Right. And so we set up the expectation that that there's going to be more down the road. And so when they say yes, I was just working with a client last week and they're having their first big event since COVID and they want it to be a hit. And I'm like, hey, I'd love to get on a few webinars with key people who are going to be there and deliver a little bit of content that's going to help you get more people to attend and to get to know some. And they couldn't believe it. They're like, really, you would do that? And I'm like, yeah, that's what we do. So, and here's a tip. A lot of times we'll say my fee is 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000, whatever your fee is. It's much better to say, hey, here's what I offer. I'm going to do 8 hours of consulting on, because we do this anyway, right? We do 8 hours of consulting on the front end. I'll do a webinar with your leadership team or a Zoom meeting to discover all your needs. If you need some help with marketing, I'll do a short video for your. And so you start building this long list of all the extra things that you probably do anyway. And you show this value. And then when they say, well, what's your fee? And you share your fee and they're like, oh, well, that's not in our budget. Then, well, what is in your budget? And then you can start taking some of these things out that they really want. Right? But because we haven't presented it on the front end, this is why I'm better, different. This is why I'm the perfect fit. It makes a huge thing. And so afterwards, like in your system, if you have a scheduled follow-up meeting with the decision makers there who brought you in, if there were speaker evaluations given, I always encourage and love that because I want to know, and just go from there.
Love it. And Tom, just one more question from me, and then I'm going to hand it over. Well, I'm going to check to see who else has questions because I really do hope somebody takes an opportunity to ask. Over the last few years, I mean, I remember like obviously Ziglar, and I said this to you recently, but Zig and Jim Rohn was the other guy that they were such good speakers that they could say, I went to the supermarket, and they can make it sound like the most profound thing in the world because of what your point, Tom, the way they said it, they were, the wordsmith quality to it had that phenomenal ability. They had lots of speaking skills. From your point of view, over the last few years, are there any speakers you've seen that stand out that you're going, wow, or great speaker, or great skill? And if so, what are the things that you think make them great speakers?
So one of the speakers that I just love, and he's a very close friend of mine. His name is Bob Modine, and he wrote The Power of Who and Two Chairs. And he uses his tone of voice in a magical way. He lowers his voice down, and almost he whisper speaks at different parts of the presentation. And I just sit back and I watch the whole room do this, right? They just kind of lean in. And it's like he's whispering to people's hearts, which is what as a speaker, if we don't move the heart, the rest of it doesn't really matter, right? Because we take action on the heart. We got to have both. We got to have the emotion and the logic. And I'm not saying that we don't need both, but I'm just saying that. And then he does a few things where he gets people to send text messages to the people they love with the message. And then he riffs off of those answers. And what happens is everybody in the room has a profound emotional experience whenever he talks. It's just, it's incredible. So he did an event. It was a corporate event, and I think there were 5,000 people. And he had them send the text, and a lady got a text back, and the text said, "Oh no, we're rushing your husband to the hospital." And she blurted that out because it was appropriate to do that, right? And 5,000 people stopped and held hands and prayed for that person right then. That is it's kind of dangerous, to think I'm just going to let it go how it goes. But if you want to see the people and be the presentation, weave experiences into it that happen organically, that allow people to just share their heart.
Love it, Tom. Absolutely love it. Thank you so much for all that you've shared so far. I'll do a rundown or a recap for everybody of some of the most important points before we close. But first, I'd like to open it up, and I'd like to invite everybody and anybody who is in the room who has any questions whatsoever for Tom. Please do now speak, or temporarily at least hold your peace. But if anyone has any questions, would anyone let me know with a hand up? Or Jean, wonderful, our esteemed president, Jean.
First of all, Tom, thank you for being with us today. Really, truly, it's a pleasure to walk down this beautiful, super paved highway by your family and your father, and it's really an honor to have you here. I spent some time on the website, and I've been looking around at some of the things that you do, and you scooted by it very quickly. But I know that now more than ever, speakers want to understand how the best of the best start their day. It's a really, really key thing. And from one early morning riser before 5 every day to another, you talked about 3 hours of peace. And if I saw on the website that there was something called Ziglar devotions. And I just want to know if you could speak to some of that, share some of the strategies you use that really give you the strength to, even as an introvert, being in front of other people, that there's something you're accessing in that time. And if there's anything you feel like sharing, we'd love to hear it.
You bet. So I get up and I get my cup of coffee, because nothing says morning peace better than fresh coffee. I go into my office, everything, is closed, turned off. I mean, there's no distraction. And I do a practice called Two Chairs. And the speaker I just spoke about, Bob Bodine, he wrote a book called Two Chairs. And in that book, it says every morning we need to spend 5 minutes and we ask these 3 questions. God, do you know what's going on? Yeah. Are you big enough to handle it?
Mm.
Yeah. What's the plan? And so I think as speakers, we're always creating, we're always trying to solve other problems. We never let our mind and our heart just receive. And so I just try to start off receiving. I'm like, okay, God, what's the plan? And so, and then after that, I'll do the devotion or reading or something that's going to spiritually lift me up. Then I do my goals and my plan for the day, and I'll do the 1 minute mental model. And so every time I have an appointment or a conversation that's going to happen during that day, I do a mind mental model for 1 minute where I say, okay, I'm gonna be on with the New York NSA. What kind of people are going to be there? What kind of questions are they going to have? Owen asks really fantastic questions. Luckily, he sent me a list of things he was going to ask. And so I'm like going over that, but that's all like 1 minute. So this is not a lot of time. What I'm doing is literally creating slots in my mind to handle any question that comes, whether it's one I was expecting or wasn't. Okay. So I do that. And then I dedicate that all takes about 45 minutes to an hour. And then whatever my one thing for the day is, that's what I do. And that's like 45 minutes to an hour for that. In writing the book, here's a tip. This worked for me. The book, Thomas Nelson's publishing it. I had written about 30,000 words. It was a 60,000 word book. I had 40 days to write 30,000 words, which, you know how we all are, right? We put it all together and we're like, how do I start? And so I made a goal with myself that every day I would write 1,000 words before I ate anything.
Mm.
And you know what? It works. Food is a motivator. I mean, not eating is a motivator. And so they call it trigger behavior reward. So I would go through my quiet time, and then I would look at my one thing, which is write the book. So that was the trigger. It was there. And then the behavior was, yeah, I'm not going in to eat anything until I've got my 1,000 words in. And then we celebrated every day. And so we got that done.
Tom, I'm just thinking now that could be also a great strategy for losing weight as well. You know?
Yes. You can't eat anything until you've lost a pound. I don't know. So that's kind of my morning routine. And I tell people, don't shoot for 2 or 3 hours, shoot for 15 minutes. So go to bed 15 minutes earlier, wake up 15 minutes earlier, and, you know, maybe pick 5 minutes of quiet time and 10 minutes of planning your most important activities for the day. And then add to that. So next you might add on reading something. I was speaking and somebody said, well, what was the number one thing that your dad did that made him who he was? And so if you want to write anything down today, this is what I would write down. Dad invested a couple hours every morning reading and learning something new that he internalized and simplified so that he could share it with someone else for their benefit. So as a speaker, if all you did was start the day 10 minutes learning something new and then internalize and simplify it. Otherwise, he called it Ziglarizing it. He put it in his own language. And then he would share it with someone else for their benefit. So when you say for their benefit, that means that you're out learning things for other people, right? If you did that 10 minutes a day for a year, how much different would your life be? It'd be a whole new life. And if every day you just send a text, hey, I was thinking about you and I thought about this, I wanted to share this with you. I'm grateful for you. I appreciate everything you've done in my life. If you send that over, now you've got a double whammy.
Great. Thanks a
Thank you.
lot, Tom. Okay, so anybody else? Any other? Thanks for the question, Gene, as always. Anyone else got any questions for Tom? Right, I'll just give a brief summary of some of the things that we covered today.
I had a question.
Yeah,
Anne had a
right,
question.
go ahead. Sorry, Anne.
Anne?
Thanks, Gene. Yeah, I had a question for you, Tom.
You
What
bet.
was your favorite speaking engagement and why is it your favorite?
Oh, it's not even close. It was Monaco because that Owen was there.
Thanks, Tom. That was my favorite too, my friend. Yeah.
That was definitely so memorable. It's there, and I'll just be honest. It's like I spoke on Friday, and I changed the ending at the end, and I had a picture of Dad at his 80th birthday party, and he's just got this glowing smile, and he's wearing a tie. And it's a tie that I wear. So I was speaking in the tie. And I'd been talking about legacy to this group, and it was a Hispanic audience. I was being translated. So it was a 2-hour and 20-minute talk that was about an hour's worth of content because of all the translation and everything going back and forth. And we were talking, the goal was change the reason you do your business, right? It's for legacy. So I get to Dad's picture and I have him say, what do you see in that face? And of course, they started shouting out in Spanish, gratitude, peace, joy. And I said, what do you think of the tie? And then they realized I was wearing the same tie. And this whole, the atmosphere of the room just changed. And then I started crying. Because this is why we do it, right? Because everyone in that room right then and there knew they had a choice. They could leave a legacy by design or by chance. And this is why we do what we do. So I don't like to cry on stage, but I don't have a problem with it. And you never know when it's going to happen. And so when you say, yeah, Marcella says, yeah.
Hello, Tom. Oh, we were almost there without any technical mashups. Tom, if you can hear me, you're frozen. Okay. And you can still hear me okay, can you?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah. What a
Okay,
moment,
perfect. Okay, I'm just going to text Tom and ask him to come back just for the final piece, but we're almost wrapping up, everyone. So what I'll do is while we're waiting for Tom to come back, we will, I'll just text him now. I'll summarize what we covered so far on it. And hopefully, I'm sure he's got the memo anyway. So, all right, so basically, everybody, we're going to wait for Tom to come back while we talk here. I'm going to just text him.
He should be back. I just admitted him into the room again.
Oh, perfect. Great.
Oh, great. There he is.
Great. Hey, Tom.
You see me?
We do. We lost you in the most important sentence.
The power went out.
Really?
Yes. So now I'm on my laptop, same desk, but I'm on my laptop.
Okay.
So I'm running off battery. Yeah. So what I was just saying is, was it Marcella? Was that her name?
Anne.
Yes,
No,
Marcella.
Marcella's put in the comment.
Yeah.
It's okay to cry with Hispanics. So
Mhm.
yes. So I'm actually I made a confession to the audience, and that is that I'm a very prejudiced human being. I prefer Mexicans. My wife is from Mexico, and so we cry all the time. It's kind of funny when you tell a big audience of 1,000 people you're prejudiced and they don't know what to do with it.
Well, a big thank you, Tom, for coming on. I know I'm very very wary that you've so many other engagements that you have to get to, but it means the world to us that you took this time out of your schedule. Love if we could get a photograph. So if everyone could make a big smile for the camera, and we'll take a nice photograph that we can use to give people a massive amount of FOMO and fear of missing out. So big smile from everyone. Great. And just to finish off, just to summarize some of the most important things we learned from Tom, we started off by asking about Tom's father, Zig, the most important lessons that he got from watching Zig in action. And part of it was about, the preparation, the energy, the passion that Zig brought to the table every day, how Zig was outside of the room as well as inside of the room, that we can all be Zig outside. We can all really 100% make the person that we talk to individually feel like the most important person in the world, because they are at that moment. Looking at how he brings identity and storytelling into the mix, and how he always shares his story. And even if you have a small amount of time, share your story. The will, the skill to refill, making sure that you're consciously working on yourself, crafting, always working on improving, and always giving yourself the time to be able to refill the energy and to do all the things that nourish your mind, your body, your soul. The importance of the beautiful concept of brokenness and expressing love and always showing up to be able to prepare as much as you can for the presentation, and then sharing truth and love the way Zig did, which is fundamentally how he was able to rate whether or not he did a good performance. Looking at the audience, instead of speaking like Zig, seeing like Zig, looking at it, and being able to make it so you're always wary when the energy is dropping, using humor or using something to be able to elevate that energy, and turning, as Dennis Wheatley said, your affirmations into confirmation. So as Tom made that feel, instead of delivering the speech or giving a great speech, it's being a great speech. And how do you do that? And that's about showing up. We talked to Tom about how he didn't need to worry about stepping outside of his father's shadow. Instead, he was just the proud son of Zig Ziglar, and he did his own thing. How important it is that we all do that in our own way. Handling COVID is really largely about letting go of the past and moving into the future, and having sort of a future president as well as a present president, where you're making decisions based upon where the speaking business is going as opposed to where it is at the moment. And sometimes we struggle because we hold on to the past. The fact is, people now in the business world have changed, as Tom mentioned. And so people are looking not just for things like healthcare, but also they want to develop themselves. They want to have a lifestyle coach, a mental coach. What that means for us as speakers is we need to focus on how we can help people empower themselves, and how we realize that the highest performers are now the ones with leverage. So we need to be speaking to those high performers in any room. If Tom was starting off for the first time, he would build a list immediately, and he'd convert social media to the list and build a relationships with people. And again, that's something we're going to talk about more over the next few months. Following up is so important. And the ability to be able to go above and beyond and really be more thoughtful and more kind. Tom is one of the most generous and kindest human beings I know, never mind speakers I know. And I know that he very much lives that legacy from his father. And another brilliant little tip from the questions that Tom was asked afterwards, which is investing a couple hours now, is what Zig would do every morning in reading something new and then sharing that new idea with somebody to make their life better. And that was a practice that we can all start to. If we can't do 2 hours, we can at least do a few minutes of it. Tom talked about Bob Bodine and his wonderful speeches, which were very much based upon reacting to the audience's needs at that moment in time and allowing yourself to connect heart to heart with that audience and to make a difference. And that's really what we do as speakers. And again, as Tom shared in his own experience recently at that event with the audience, crying on stage came about because he was willing to open himself up to that world. And that's something I think we all need to do, which is, in some ways is the opposite to performance. It very much is being connected at a very deep level with the audience. So a big thank you, Tom, to you for sharing for the last 90 minutes or so. Incredible wisdom, guidance. It's my pleasure, my privilege to be your friend. And it's my honor to have this opportunity to talk. So thank you so much, Tom, for all the greatness you shared on behalf of myself. And thank you to everybody for attending. We've got next month to look forward to. Neil Gordon on Finding Your Silver Bullet. But for now, Tom, thanks, mate. I look forward to seeing you and the family again very soon.
Thank you so much. What a great time.
Take care. See you, everyone. I'll see you soon. We'll be back next month. Take care.